Hi, this is Chad of the American band Excommunicated, and you are listening to the Metal Bloodshed with the Vampire on Metal Messiah Radio International.
It's with a great pleasure to have Chad Kelly of Louisiana, a medieval Catholic death metalers excommunicated in interview. Hi, Chad. How are you doing? And welcome to the Bloodshed with the Vampire on Metal Messiah Radio International.
Hi, Jacob. I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Chad, you were born and raised in Louisiana, and how have you decided to become a metal vocalist?
Yes, I was born and raised here in Baton Rouge. Lived here most of my life, aside from a few years that I lived in Texas and a bit of traveling I did when I was younger. I grew up on a lot of the original first-generation metal that came out of this state, things like Graveyard Rodeo and The Slugs, which was later Crowbar, and I Hate God and Exhorter, and just many of those great bands, Stress Ball, and just so many that aren't around anymore. I started out really as a fan of thrash metal and then kind of got into death metal in the early 90s when it became big, and then kind of moved more into the black metal area as that started to get big in the earlier to mid 90s. The first band I was in, I was originally the vocalist, and they knew that I did some ambient eerie music on keyboard on the side, so I sort of became the keyboard player for that band before we made our first record, and we hired a vocalist to come in and replace me. And then when that band ended, I wanted to go back to doing vocals again, so that's how I became the vocalist on Excommunicated. I thought it would be fun to come back to where I originally was, 20 years ago as a vocalist. I thought that would be fun, even though there are some keyboard and piano and organ parts on Excommunicated that I still got to do. Like on the covers record, there's a few little pieces there. So I get to do both, but mostly focus on vocals these days.
Chad, you have been around for at least the last 20 years. How do you see, or what do you see the great things happening in metal nowadays, and what are the worst things happening?
I think death metal and extreme metal in general is becoming sort of a victim of its own success, if that makes any sense. The good thing is that so many more people are into it, and it's such a legitimate art form now, whereas 20 years ago this was stuff that people didn't take seriously and almost would think that you were a bad person. And now that it's such a mature genre that you have people who are doctors and lawyers and they're grown up and they have families, and it's kind of become a culturally established thing. It shows up in sitcom and it shows up everywhere. I think that's really cool and almost kind of unbelievable. The bad thing is that it's harder to distinguish yourself now. It used to be, 20, 25 years ago that each band, there were so fewer bands, and so they all had such a distinct sound. You would never mistake Obituary for Grave or for Deicide or Morbid Angel or Pestilence, and all these bands had just a whole world unto themselves. And now you have bands that will sound infinite degrees between all of those other bands, and bands that sound exactly like Gorefest or exactly like Entombed and it's becoming just so crowded. Sometimes when I buy music online and I go to Metal Hit or I go to Spotify, and there's so much there that it's just bewildering. There's so many records coming out that I know I wouldn't even be able to listen to all of them if I tried 24/7. And it can be depressing in a way because, for one, you miss out on so many good artists because you only have so much time. And also, if you're producing music, you feel like your work is maybe getting lost in the sauce. It's lost in the infinite sea. And I certainly feel that way about my stuff. I feel like we're competing against thousands of other artists. It's so hard to be noticed. There's an interview I read with the creators of that death metal cartoon, Metalocalypse, and he said the same thing. He said the reason he made a cartoon instead of a band out of Death Clock was because if it was just a record, it would be lost in that sea of infinite things to listen to, and that was the only way he knew how to make it stand out and make it to where people noticed you. And that's where I think we're struggling now. How do you get noticed? I was really shocked and really happy, our mutual friend and collaborator, Jason McIntyre, with Voracious Scourge, that it managed to pick up traction. I know when he started on it, it was just something he wanted to do for himself, and it got noticed. He accomplished that, and I think he was as surprised as anyone, but that's the challenge, though. That's the struggle. How do you get noticed? And I think with Excommunicated, because we all have other jobs and other obligations, we're not able to kind of work the marketing side of it the way that you might have to. Like if you're a younger band, you might have the time to do that. And we didn't. And so you can spend years working on a record and 10 people will buy it. And that's just kind of the depressing.
To start off with some of the bands that you was part of, I must say Catholicon formed on April 9, 1994.
Yes.
And ended on July 31st, 2009 was started and always remained an uncompromised spearhead against fundamentalist and orthodox religions, Christianity and Catholics.
Yes.
You was part of this band from Louisiana, black death metal band Catholicon, as Blast Fire on vocals and keyboards, where you released 4 albums with the bands in 15 years. How was this band formed? How was all these records throughout the years?
It's a great question, and a lot to go over there. So I'll try to be brief with it. We did start in 1994, and we were all teenagers at the time. This is funny but true. We met at a church. We met at a Baptist church where we had showed up to harass or give a hard time to a televangelist named Bob Larson, who had come into town. And he made a career out of saying bad things about metal music, that, that you were going to hell and that sort of thing if you listen to this type of music. And so, of course, in the early 90s, there's nothing better to do. So all these teenagers show up to this church to picket and harass Bob Larson. And that was exactly what he wanted. He loved that attention, and it made more money for him. But that was actually how the original guys met. It's where I met the original 2 or 3 guys that we formed the band with. We left that church saying, well, we need to form a band. We need to do this.
Actually, you have to thank this priest formation of this band.
Exactly. So we started, and within a month or so of that, we had written one song, the song Anathema, and we continued to work on a demo. We made a demo later that year in 1994. We made another demo in 95 and 96 and in 97, and then in 97 we did our first album, The Lost Chronicles of the War in Heaven. It was very different and very raw, but it has a special place for me. It was the very first black metal album that was ever released in Louisiana. Everybody else was doing, something that sounded more like Pantera or Acid Bath or something, and so we were kind of unique in that we went a very different direction, and I think it was the first black metal album ever put out in Louisiana. We weren't the first black metal band, I will say that. Kilgore, which later became Goatwhore, they were actually the first. They beat us by just a few months, so I'll give them credit for that. And Sammy's an old friend of mine. But, we were the first, I think, to put a CD out. And it's funny that today there's actually 3 or 4 black metal bands, even doom black metal bands in Louisiana, that probably have no idea who we even were. We kind of got passed by, but we kept it going. There was a lot of lineup changes, but we kept it going, up until the end of 2009. And at that point, I think nobody was really feeling that we had good chemistry together anymore. Everyone had kind of gone their different ways, and we called it quits and put out the final album in 2009, along with like a DVD box set of all the demos remastered so people could hear all the unreleased stuff. And I think that was a good way to go out. I was proud of the 4 records in the sense that they were all different. Each one really sounded like a different band. We kind of never did the same record twice. I thought that was a good thing. I mean, there's a lot of things I wish could have been done better, but I'm happy about certain things about it.
Chad, I've listened to both albums the band last release, and I want to thank you, and thanks Jason as well for sending me these great bands collections. I want to say that the album, I'm talking about the album Treatise on the Abyss, much more heavier and with more death elements incorporated compared to Of Ages Past, which combines some of the better elements of all three previous albums, as well as goes into some melancholic and experimental realms. Don't take me wrong, I love both albums. I love the music like Immaculate Deception, Legion of One, Battle Hymn 666, God of the Cross, Heart of Bleeds Eyes, Eve Bewitched, Sanctimony, Anno Domini, Blood, Ink for the Blood of Life, Fate of the Fallen, Revel in the Ashes, and many, many more. Great songs that appear on these albums. How was the making of Ages of Past compared to Treatise Under the Abyss? What have the band done differently?
So yes, those records are very different from each other, and I'm glad you noticed. A lot of it had to do with kind of the songwriting team changing between those two albums. So on Treaties, the longtime guitar player of The Shape and the vocalist INRI really took the reins and wrote most of that record, Treaties on the Abyss. Majority of it they wrote. And at that time, people were listening, including me, we were listening to a lot of like sort of the newer death metal bands like Cattle Decapitation. And I think that definitely had an influence on the writing, and it had that real heavy guttural sound, even though it still involved some keyboards and some black metal elements, but it also had kind of the squeal vocals and the really low-tuned guitar and everything, so, and heavier drum. We were definitely going for a brutal death metal sound on that record, and I really like how Treaties came out. Sometimes I think it's my favorite one, even though I had the least involved with putting that one together. But on Of Ages Past, which we started on a couple years later, Treaties was also recorded in a professional studio in Texas, which was the only time we went to another studio to work and had production and advice and stuff like that. And so that may have, and one of the guys I think who did some guest work on that record was in another death metal band. On Treaties, we had come back to Baton Rouge and we were writing and recording it here in Baton Rouge again. And instead of most of the work being done by INRI and The Shape, I think myself and Mike Rogers, who was the longtime drummer, began to get more involved in putting songs together. I think The Shape wrote most of the songs initially, but Mike added his own guitar flourishes, and we started experimenting with different sounds in the studio with acoustic guitar and with keyboard elements and spoken word elements, and we were really trying to be more experimental. And I think, and Mike and I both kind of knew the chemistry was kind of gone, and we all kind of knew that this was the last record. And so there's a sense throughout Of Ages Past of doom, of the apocalypse, of things coming to an end, because we knew that was probably the last record. And I think you can hear it on the record. It's more doomy, it's more apocalyptic, depressing, and most of the songs are about death and ending and hopelessness and things like that. So I think you can kind of tell that record, I think of that record as sort of the funeral dirge for the band. You can hear it on the record that kind of shines through. And because I think we had sort in a way run out of ideas, we were experimenting more desperately with different sounds and different ideas. And I think you hear that on the record also. It's a strange record. It is. It's doomy and very,
especially for fans that love this doomy style or more black, melancholic, would have loved this album.
Yeah, I think so. We have all the records remastered and on Spotify now, as well as iTunes and everything. So I'm hoping that, people who didn't know about us back in the day when we were together, they have a chance now to check us out free of charge. And so maybe it will kind of take on a second life.
Sure. But talk about the cover artwork. I see the front cover of this album I'm talking about now, Of Ages Past, was provided by Jumali Katani, Malta artist, and the back cover artwork was provided by Julia Wurma of Finland. Is this the first time the band worked with Katani, and how come you decided to work with Wurma as well?
Juha Wurma was an artist from Finland that we worked with since the beginning of the band, and he did the cover art for the very first album, Lost Chronicles of the War in Heaven. He did that original canvas artwork back in 1997. So we continued to work with him. He did the cover for the third album as well, Treatise on the Abyss, and he did the back artwork for that album. And so we knew that Of Ages Past was the last record, and so we wanted to involve Juha one last time, and so we got him to do the artwork that was featured on the back of Ages Past. Jumali Katani, metal artist, is a guy that we had worked with a few times as well. We got him to do the front cover art. He's also done a lot of great death metal album covers, and I think he's no longer in business. We acquired that piece before he closed up shop, so to speak, and so we were able to use it. And it's a pretty cool piece, and I felt like it kind of summed up the band's attitude and history. And it was based on a lot of what you see on the Of Ages Past cover is kind of inspired by woodcut drawings of the devil, from Dante's Inferno, from the Divine Comedy. And we had used those woodcut drawings on our early demos back in the mid-90s. And so it was a chance to kind of revisit that and kind of close the book in a way that was, respectful of our past and the things we had done before.
Chuck, any intentions to revive it back to life from the eternal, deepest, and darkest place of rest?
We've talked about it. It seems like everyone gets back together these days. And the thing with Catholicon is that there's probably 20 ex-members, and there's only a few that I feel like are still available and able to do music. Some of them don't play music anymore. They went on and had careers and stopped playing music. And some of them I don't even know how to find. Not everybody is on Facebook, so some of them have disappeared from my life and I don't know how to find them. It would be hard to pick the right people. The one person that I have stayed in touch with, and some have moved to other countries also, but the one person I've stayed in touch with constantly that was a member of Catholicon on and off again was Jonathan Joubert, who's also in Excommunicated. He lives about an hour away in Lafayette, and he and I have talked about doing it and making another record. It seems like every year we talk about it, but it never happens. And if we did, I would want it to be a black metal record in the style of early 90s, black metal, and just something totally different than what most people are doing here now. And I would like to get the involvement of at least one more original member if possible. And funny enough, the original drummer actually lives right down the street from me. He lives about 10 houses right down the road. I can walk to his house, and he and I have stayed in touch over the years as well. And he still plays music, but not that type of music. So if he was interested, then I think we'd have something fun. Yeah.
Going back to another band, hailing from far north, came Satanath. Their grim lo-fi sadomasochistic debut album in 2008. Chad, you was also performing as Marquis Deicide,
Yeah.
together with Timothy Bartlett as Giles de Rais for this two-piece black metal band Satanath, a band formed in 2006 from Alaska. Okay, how has this band been formed?
Great question. Thank you. We made the record while we were in between working on the Catholicon albums. The bass player that we had for the last three records and myself, we did a couple demo songs in 2006, and then we made that record in 2007. We wrote and recorded almost that entire record in just 3 days. I took a 3-day vacation from work and went down to Texas, and we stayed up for 3 days and made that record.
You had a special purposes in making this record as well, right?
That's right, yes. So if you listen to the Catholicon album, Treatise on the Abyss, that we talked about earlier, that came out around that time, which was the most death metal influenced. And like I said, that album has elements of cattle decapitation and guttural death metal and stuff like that. So we felt like, since Catholicon was originally a black metal band, and we weren't really doing that musically with the band at the time, it made sense to put all of that energy into a separate record. And so that was also kind of the Satanist became an outlet to do just grim necro black metal, raw recording, and just simple and aggressive and hateful and satanic and as you can get. And so that was a kind of a way to get that out of our system so that we could continue doing Catholicon and going down the more death metal road that band was going on. You get to do both, which was fun. And I still love both. You know, I still listen to every kind of metal from, Judas Priest and Black Sabbath to necro black metal like Anal Nathrak and death metal. I love Septic Flesh, and I still like a lot of the death metal bands that became other things like Paradise Lost or Therion and Tiamat, so my tastes are all over the place, and so I like to get to do different things, and so I would surely do another Satanist album if the opportunity came, and we actually talked about doing it. Unfortunately, Tim is another one of those people that kind of disappeared over the years, and I lost touch with him, and I don't know how to reach him anymore. But we had fun doing it.
He's in the north.
Yeah, he might have moved to Barrow, Alaska finally. I'll have to fly up there and see. But we actually were discussing making a prequel to the album, because in the stories that we made up to make up the mythology for that band, there was an original drummer that we made up named Frostbite who died or committed suicide in the late 1980s or something like that. And we were going to find, quote unquote, the original demo with him. It was a 3-piece. And so we were talking about going in the studio to make a record that sounded even more raw and primitive, that had the original drummer, and it would be, something we were going to record it on a tape recorder or something and make it really raw, and it would be very noisy. And we were going to say that he had buried the tapes in the ice and the frozen permafrost, and they had just been unearthed. And that would have been very fun to do, and it unfortunately just one of those things that didn't get to happen. And I wish it had. I really liked performing the vocals on the Satanist album. When I listen back, I think that's some of my favorite vocal work, because I normally don't get to do vocals that are in that style. So it was very expressive and very raw. And I like the idea of making a record so quickly that you don't have time to overanalyze. Like, I've never worked that fast before. I usually spend a year working on a record, and we did that record in 3 days, like I said. That was just working around the clock, and I've never seen anybody, put together music that quickly before. So that was a fun experience.
And still it came out good.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. And very few people know about that record. It's another one of those things, like when it just kind of got laid to rest, we just kept the Alaska story, and very few people outside of the band and close friends ever knew I was even on that CD. I don't even own any copies of it. It's just kind of a lost gem.
A dark treatise on the medieval Catholic Church Skeleton Key is that rare metal album released on July 15, 2011, a product of combined influences of Chap Kelly, vocalist, ex-Catholicon, Underworld's Records, guitarist, bassist Jason McIntyre, ex-Suture, guitarist Jonathan Joubert, Cemetary, ex-Despondency, ancestor drummer David Kincaid, Boknagar, ex-Malevolent Creation, and ex-Arceus. Chad, it has been many years we did not hear anything of Excommunicated, and exactly 7 years after the band's debut album Skeleton Key. What has happened with the band all these years?
A lot of things happened. I take responsibility for part of it. I want to say that whenever Catholicon broke up, and Jason's band Suture had also broke up in recent years too, as well as Jonathan's band Psychometry, we all kind of had an urge to hurry up and get something new out to prove that we were still in the game, so to speak. And I think so Skeleton Key happened pretty quickly. And after that, I want to say that really is when I guess age and time caught up with everyone around the same time. Everybody had different things they were dealing with, from having children to deaths in the family and separations and moving, changing jobs and careers. And I moved to Texas. I was so busy in Texas for 2 years, I couldn't focus on anything else. And so life just sort of finally happened at that point and pulled everybody in different directions and gave us all different challenges. And so the band really just got put on hold after Skeleton Key. And it's a shame because I really wanted us to do a new full-length album. And I think now we finally are. But we started working on the covers record around 2012, right after Skeleton Key was out. And that was also something that, it got shelved as everything just started happening with different people getting tied up with different obligations and me having to move. And we didn't get to finish mixing and release that until, earlier this year when it finally saw the light of day, which is after I moved back. In 2016, there was a major flood here in Louisiana where 44,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. And my house was one of them. I owned a house here in Louisiana, the house I live in now, while I was living in Texas and working in Texas. And that forced me to come back and to rebuild the house. And I had to do most of the work myself with help from my father. And so I wasn't able to do anything for a year while I was rebuilding my house also. But when I finally finished that, I rebuilt a very basic makeshift studio, not as nice as the studio I used to have, but enough to complete the work. And so then I was finally this year able to listen to those recordings and finish the mix of the new covers record, Devout, and get that out. That's the long story short of why that happened. And it was something I never wanted to see happen. I didn't want to see it slow down for that many years, but it just seemed like it was just beyond all of our control. One thing after another just kept happening. And 7 years is definitely a long time, but I'm hoping we're going to make up for it now. We have this covers record out, and where we have another shorter EP of covers that we may release digitally at the end of the year. And I'm hoping by next year we'll be working on the new full-length album, making up for lost time, I hope.
Chad, Excommunicated brought a new level of sonic terror on Skeleton Key, also featuring guest appearances by guitarist Andy LaRocque, Kane Diamond, ex-World 5, and vocalist Vincent Crowley of Walton Society. Excommunicated plays a style of death metal with black metal touches, but you played plenty of melodies of your own style with this band, Excommunicated. Even though Skeleton Key was a very heavy album, the band never forgot about incorporating chilling melodic guitar lines into their music, and dark atmospheric mixed with inherently frightening lyrics makes this one a hell of creep album. How has this album turned out for the band towards media and fans, and how was the work with all the guest musicians being chopped?
It came out well, and I'm really happy with it, and I think that even though, like I say, we didn't have the publicity wing to really get out there and take the world by storm. I do think the people who found out about the album really liked it a lot. Locally, there's a lot of people who respect it locally in the local scene. It had the effect I wanted it to have. I mean, I think we suffer a lot from not being able to perform live shows. I think if we had been able to play live and to tour, it would have really taken off more. I also think if we had released the album under a label, it would have become more successful instead of choosing to self-release it, which we did. And we're on a record label now. And in fact, Metallic Media, who released our new one, they took over Skeleton Key and they picked up all the remaining stock from me, and they're selling it now. And I've seen it in the past year that they've taken it. It's gotten into the hands of so many more people and people I never would have been able to get the record to. It had just been me. So that's been good. So you live and learn. And I've begun to respect more the work that record labels do and PR companies do and how important that is. Even if people think they don't really need that, they really do. It's not about manufacturing discs. It's really about getting those records into the hands of the right people. And an artist really, unless you have a full-time person managing publicity, it's very hard for an artist to just do that on their own. I've kind of learned that and learned to respect the work that those guys do. And I'm using that now for sure. But I liked how the record came out. It was one of the first records as far as things I've mixed and mastered myself. It was one of the first ones where I really sat back and felt satisfied that it sounded like an album. And, so it has a special place in my heart for that. And it was great to do a lot of different vocal styles on there. It challenged me because I hadn't done those types of vocals in many years, being the keyboardist for Catholicon on the last few records. And I had done backing vocals and a bit of vocals here and there. But it was good to challenge me to try to get back in it as a full-time vocalist and try a bunch of different styles, from high to low vocals and different other things in between. It was great to get the guest performances that we got on there. Vincent Crowley is somebody I've known for the longest time, since the first Acheron record, or even before when it was a 7-inch record, I think. He and I had been pen pals and had written to each other, and we stayed in touch over the years, so it was great to get my friend Vincent to do the backing vocals. Acheron was always one of those bands that I liked a lot. I always considered them sort of the American version of Unleashed because it was simple and straightforward and to the point and aggressive and heavy. Vincent always had a unique voice too. And Andy LaRocque from King Diamond, it was an interesting story. I've always been a fan of King Diamond, and anyone who knows me knows that I consider King Diamond's album The Eye from 1990 to be just my favorite album in the world. It's to me a perfect record. Some of the stuff that he did after The Eye, it's hit or miss. Some of it's harder to get into. And when they remastered all of those records for Metal Blade, Fighter's Lullaby and House of God and Voodoo and all of that, I just sent an email to Andy LaRocque off of his webpage out of the blue for no reason, just congratulating him on the remastering of those records. And I said, I wasn't expecting to get a reply back. And I just said, thank you for doing that, because as a huge fan, now I can listen to the Spider's Lullaby and it sounds great and it holds up against all the other records. And I really love what you did with it. And funny enough, he replied back later that night, thanked me, and we continued to talk. And I asked him if he would do a guest lead on my record, and I wasn't expecting him to say yes, but he said yes. And a few weeks later, he did it, and
very great.
Yeah, and I love what he did. It added a whole different dimension to that song, and I think we picked the perfect song. The song he plays on was a song we wrote trying to sound like Amorphous, which was one of my favorite old death metal bands from the 90s. If you listen to Amorphous, the Karelian Isthmus and Privilege of Evil, you'll see where that song Christ's Sword kind of came from. And with Andy playing on it, it gives it a whole different dimension on top of that, which was really cool.
Hearken, we beseech thee, O Lord, to our prayers, and deign to bless with the right hand of thy majesty this sword with which thy servant desires to be girded, that it may be a defense of churches, widows, orphans, and all thy servants against the scourge of pagans, that it may be the terror and dread of all evildoers, and that it may be just in both attack and defense. Amen.
Chad, 7 years later, as we said, after your debut album, you came up with the same lineup, but with Mike Heller on drums.
Yeah.
For this record, you also included a number of guest appearances as well as James Murphy. I must say that what a great cover album this one album just released this year, Devout on April 20, 2018 via Satanath Records, Russia. And you're also working again with Metallic Media USA. Excommunicated did a remarkable job with all these cover and injected their own original to the songs while still being respectful to the original. Chad, how was the recording for this album gone, and was it any more difficult or much easier compared to the one you done before?
Thank you. That's a great question. A lot to answer there. It was more difficult just because by the time we began really tracking the covers record, we were living in different places and dealing with many different things. And so that presented an additional challenge. And, Jonathan didn't get to be on the record as much as he had been on the previous one. He's on at least 2 songs, but he couldn't be on the record more, I think, because of some things he was going through at the time. And so, we were dealing with a lot of those problems, and me having to finish the record in Texas, which was very challenging. I was having to try to finish it on weekends from my apartment, and so in a sense it was a lot more difficult. And as you noticed, Mike Heller, who is from Fear Factory and Malignancy, and he plays with Raven now, the classic British heavy metal band, and he's a great drummer. He plays on it. Dave Kincaid, who had played drums on Skeleton Key, had retired from music after Skeleton Key. He actually is a train conductor now and works for the railway system here in the States, and makes a great living. And it was a decision he needed to do to take care of his family and to get health insurance, and totally respect that. So we reached out to Mike Heller, whom we knew through some mutual friends, and he agreed to do it as a session musician. And it was a good choice. Mike Heller really put his own sort of fresh spin on those songs, and in a way he overplays them a bit from the way they were originally done, but he gave it his own style, and I thought that was really good. And you're right, we got James Murphy to do a guest lead. He's also somebody I've known for a long time. He had mastered a record for me about 10 years ago. He mastered one of the Catholicon albums, actually, Treaties on the Abyss, that was mastered at his studio in Florida. And so we stayed in touch over the years, and we asked him to do a lead on the Obituary song because he played that lead whenever he was in Obituary when they toured. He said that he could remember how to play the lead exactly how he played it on the Cause of Death tour. I said, that's an opportunity I can't pass up to have him on there, even though he's not the original guitarist from the first album, from Slowly We Rot, but he did play it, and he played it his own way from the way he played it during Cause of Death, and that's as close as you can get, and I thought that was really amazing. One of the things we wanted to do with the covers record also was, like you noticed, to be more respectful to the original material, because so many people do covers records where they sound just like themselves, and they don't try to even bend their sound a little bit to the way the original artist sounded. One good example of that is the Graveyard Classic series by 6 Feet Under, which I do enjoy, but it sounds exactly like 6 Feet Under and nothing like the original bands. And we wanted to try to see if we could play in the style of these original bands, match their tuning, and in some cases their original guitar sound a little bit better. And I tried as hard as I could to respect the vocal style of each of the people that sang on those songs originally, and to push my voice as far as I could in their direction, to be respectful to them, to where it still sounds like me, but I'm trying to do it the way they did it, if that makes any sense. And that was fun and challenging to do.
Yes, what a great result out of it. I listened to the whole album. I just can't stop listening.
Thank you. That's awesome.
talking about the songs, so a great selection of great songs of legendary bands that we have seen or heard their music, and great bands in the history of metal. How come you came to the conclusion to do this cover album, and how was the processing of the selection of all the songs been?
The selection process was difficult, for sure, and it was really hard to narrow down those songs. We wanted to do so many songs that we could do 5 versions of that record, and not run out of great choices. And there are some things like that I really wanted to do a Carcass song so bad, and I really wanted to do a Hypocrisy song so bad, and there's so many things that we didn't get to do that we should have, but there's just so many songs. When we first started talking about it in 2011, 2012, right after Skeleton Key, Jason McIntyre and I were talking about an album by Morgoth called Cursed, and we just said, that record is so epic, and it's a record that's meant to be listened to from beginning to end, and it's conceptual, and it has a feel. And it seems like today people just write singles and they put those together to make an album. And I was saying, no one makes death metal albums like that anymore. Albums that are written as albums to be listened to in their entirety, and not as background, but to be paid attention to and enjoyed. And no one makes records like that anymore. And we said, why don't we do the entire Cursed album as a cover, as a tribute? We wanted to do the whole album at first. There's a couple records that I think could have been done in their entirety. And we also talked about, some of the more underground stuff. Like, I thought about it would be nice to do a covers record that's all more underground death metal from the early 90s, like Deteriorate and Morbius and Morpheus Descends, and a German band called Apophis that I like a lot, that not a lot of people know about. But, so you can make a covers record of all obscure covers, Accidental Suicide and Mortuary Drape and Morgue and Oppressor, and just all those bands from the 90s that didn't become mainstream, that were on the smaller labels and stuff. But we thought, at the end of the day, we decided the best thing to do was to stick to the classics that were on the bigger labels that people would remember and recognize, so that people would have some way to identify with those songs, even if they weren't diehard fans that were deep in the underground and the tape trading circuits, the way that we were. And another thing, and this is kind of petty, but one of the other things that got us started on the covers record was one of the first reviews of Skeleton Key that showed up on Metal Archives, and I check the Metal Archives website all the time. It's kind of the Bible of the industry. And one of the reviewers of Skeleton Key really gave us a bad review and didn't understand where we were coming from with the album. And they said, you guys are writing music for death metal teenagers. I still don't understand what that means. And I'm in my mid-40s. I don't even know what teenagers listen to. And I thought, what I'll do is, and I probably, whatever they're listening to, I probably hate it, And so, I said, what we should do is we should make a record that shows people what our roots are and where we're coming from. And that was something, we never got to do with Catholicon or Suture or Despondency or any of the previous bands we were in. We never got to make a record that really showed people where we were coming from musically, what we grew up on. And so that's what this record does. It shows you exactly what our roots are, what inspired us, the music we grew up on when we were in high school. That's what the record is. So if you hear Devout, it's kind of strange to make a covers record your second album, but I think having that as a basis, if you listen to that, where we're coming from on all future albums. You're going to know where we're getting these ideas and these sounds, is coming from that.
Chad, going back to the 2011 when Skeleton Key was released, the album was engineered and mixed at the UW studio in Baton Rouge. That was by yourself, right?
Yes.
All the percussion recorded and engineered at the Forgotten Prophet studio that was in LA, and the mix and master at Maor Applebaum Mastering that was in California. But tell me, how has the recording process been handled this time with Devout?
With Devout, we did more of it ourselves this time, and partly it was just because we were out of time and out of money, and we kind of had to complete it here. So we didn't get to hire, Malware Applebaum because you have to budget for that. That's an expensive mastering service. And Malware's done work for, Cynic and Rob Halford and Sepultura, and Malware's done a lot of good work. And he's one of the most sought after mastering guys. He did the new Faith No More album. So he does some pretty big stuff. And so that's an expensive process. And we didn't get to do that. I mastered it here, did the mixing and mastering here.
So all the budget was spent on Skeleton Key, you want to say?
Yeah, we had less of a skeleton budget.
How was the recording, of this album?
It was fun. We did most of the guitars here. As you mentioned, Forgotten Prophet Studios is the studio at Jonathan Joubert's house, the guitar player in Excommunicated. So he did his parts in Lafayette, and we did my parts, and Jason McIntyre's parts were done here at my house at UW Studio, which is just what I call my home studio. The name came from a fanzine that I used to do in the early 90s. Before I was ever even in a band, I did like an underground death metal fanzine called Underworld Magazine that lasted for about 4 issues. Before I gave up on it, and I mailed them out for free. And it was a combination of interviews and reviews of albums and pictures I would draw and things like that. I was a teenager at the time, but that was where Underworld came from, and everything I've kind of done since then, I've used the UW initials as sort of a reference to that. There were other things recorded in other parts of the world. A lot of times, even on Skeleton Key, when Vincent Crowley did his vocals, he did them in Ohio and sent them to us, over the internet. And the good things about technology now is that it allows you to do things like that, and it allows you to collaborate with people that you ordinarily wouldn't be able to collaborate with. And even though I really miss the chemistry of working things out in a garage, with a real drummer and singer and all that, I still think that's where some of the best chemistry and the best songwriting happens. But the reality is that in today's world, you just often can't do that. And so I'm glad that the technology allows people to have another option of sending tracks to people who just aren't going to be able to make it. And that's something that we're probably going to exploit more on the next record more than ever before, because Mike Keller is going to record the drums in California in a studio that I've helped him put together. And we'll probably do the vocals here. And now Jason McIntyre has a home studio set up at his place where he's done a lot of the work for Voracious Scourge. And he'll probably be able to do his guitars from home. So, and Jonathan Joubert will also. So I feel like we're going to be more separate than ever before on the next record.
You're still working with Bruno as your bassist?
On the next record, I think he will be. We haven't asked him yet, actually. So Bruno Muenzler is probably one of the most talented local bassists that there is in Louisiana for this type of music. And he's also very in demand. He's in several bands right now, and he owns his own business and he stays very busy. But he was the bass player for Suture, and even before Suture, he was the bass player for Necrotomy, which was one of the first death metal bands in Louisiana that a lot of people have a lot of respect for still. Super talented guy. So we haven't gotten far enough along into the songwriting process. I think we have 2 or 3 songs written. I think Jonathan has put in a couple and Jason's put in one. And when we get to the recording phase, we'll find out how busy Bruno is. And if he's free and able to do it, we'll ask him to do it again. And if he's not, then we may just do it ourselves like we did on Skeleton Key. So it remains to be seen, I guess. But I do think that the covers record benefits a lot from having a real bass player on it, rather than the guitar players taking turns doing it.
That's true.
It adds another personality.
Before we conclude this interview, I want to go over what you want to express or represent having, all these numerous skeleton head white as a piece and hanging in the air on the cover artwork. Tell me.
Yeah, well, that one was done by Jumali Katani, again, metal artist, who had also done Skeleton Key and had also done the last Catholicon album of Ages Past. So we've stayed with Jumali for a while, but I think Jumali is no longer in business either. And so there's another artist we may use for the next record, or the next record may be a photograph again. There's a photograph of the Grim Reaper that I like. It's a still image from the movie Metropolis that we may use as the cover on the next one. It is kind of simple, and well, some people gave us a hard time for having a skull on Skeleton Key, and so I thought it would be funny to just kind of make them even more mad by putting more skulls on on the next one, just to be even more generic and more silly. Skeleton Key had a real reason behind it, so. The cover of Skeleton Key is sort of a macabre take on a Catholic symbol called the keys to the kingdom, or the key of the first pope and the apostle. You know, in the Catholic myth that Jesus descended from heaven to hand the keys to heaven to Paul. And that's a Catholic symbol, and you see that engraved like in Boardwalk, Vatican City, and in statues. It's done out of brass and out of wrought iron. You see a lot of images of Paul holding these large keys. Sometimes they're brass, sometimes they're concrete, that are the keys to heaven. But that's the symbol of those keys. And we put a skull there in place of the papal crown. On the Catholic version of it, you see there's a papal crown in the center. And so we made sort of a death metal version of that symbol, since the album is called Skeleton Key, and the album is about, you know, Catholic history and medieval torture and cruelty and things like that. And that's kind of what we were trying to get across on the record. And so even though it's a skull, it was a fitting point. You know, it fit the lyrics well to go with that. On Of Ages Past, there's not a lot of thought process. It's a bunch of skulls. It was a picture that we bought from Jamali Katani, and I thought it fit because in the early 90s of death metal, and especially in the 80s as well, you see a lot of records with skulls on them. I mean, look at Sepultura, and who had a few that were based around, you know, skulls, and Forbidden and Crocus, and just there's so many classic records that have a skull on them. I thought it was fitting to put the skulls on there, since it was a covers record from the golden age of death metal.
Chad, for those who have already laid their hands on this album and bought it, and for those who are still in need to buy this album. Yeah, after all we have already mentioned, I would still ask this question because I know you are busy, Jason is busy, Bruno is busy, everybody seems to be very busy. Mike, do you think there's any possibility that the fans can have a chance to see Excommunicated live?
I want to do it. I really want to do it bad. You know, that being said, I think we all want to do it. There's a couple problems. One is finding a local drummer, you know, because obviously Mike Heller can't fly down from California to do the show. I would love it if he could. I would love that. But even if he did, he would have to rehearse with us a bunch of times. And so it's just not practical. So we would have to find a local drummer who could do it, who could play those songs. And then it would just be a matter of scheduling to see if we could all get together enough to practice and to make it happen. I sure want to do it. And I think it would only be Baton Rouge and maybe Texas would be the only, as far as we would probably be able to venture out, just because we all have jobs and obligations and things like that. It's something I continue to talk about, and we all do. And I even have a soundproofed closed-in building in my home that we could use to practice. So it's something I even think about in those terms of how we could practice here and get ready for the songs. It really is, getting older really is something, because the older you get, life definitely seems to get in the way of making things happen. And when you're younger, when I was 17, you could spend every night in the mini storage practicing, and you feel like you have all the time in the world, and practice until 3 a.m. and still go to work the next day. And you just feel like you have all this time. And when you get older, all that time just disappears, and you don't know what happened to all of it. And I'm still trying to figure out where all the time has gone,
Gone, yeah. But let's cross the finger that you can find a local drummer, and that the fans around there can still get to see you guys live.
Thank you. I would love for it to happen. It would really be, it's on my bucket list of things to do, is to play one more show and to get a record released on vinyl. Those are two things that I still want to do a lot.
And again, folks, and to all of you out there who loves the old school death metal, Excommunicated mix up some blast beats. Like you said, when you hear these songs, With respect, I want to say that they're even better than the original. The Undead Devout. Wow, what a great job you guys have done. Thank you once again very much for taking time out, for giving us this opportunity to interview you. And I want to hand you over the microphone of Metal Messiah Radio for you to invite all your friends, all your fans to support the band and to buy this great new album, That Devout. Okay, Chad, the microphone is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. I really appreciate the interview. It's been an honor. Wow, we've covered 20 years of stuff. It's great to talk to people who still support this music and help make it happen. And I wonder where all the time has gone, because we've been doing this stuff now in different ways. The first demo I put out was 25 years ago, almost 25, in 1994. And it's been a crazy run. And I'm glad that we're all able to still keep doing music, even if it happens at a slower pace now because of all the craziness of life. We did just finally put out the covers album, Devout, and I would encourage anybody who hasn't heard it to please check it out. It's on Spotify, on iTunes, on Apple Music, Amazon. It's all available on CD through Metallic Media and Satanath Records, shipping worldwide. And the original CD skeleton key is still available. You can still find that CD as well through Metallic Media, through eBay, through Amazon, worldwide. And that one's available digitally as well. It's old school death metal, and the covers album is a collection of songs from the golden age of death metal, which is the early to mid 90s, which most of the music I still listen to today I find is from that time period. I don't know if it's subconsciously or what, even though I still listen to and try to discover new bands, and I still listen to the new albums by all the old bands that I still love. But I tend to keep gravitating back toward those early 90s as just sort of the golden age of when this type of music was the most experimental and the most bold and doing the most revolutionary things, and if we can keep that going forward, through the various things we're trying to do, whether it's Excommunicated or with Jason's other band, Voracious Scourge, which is purely a love letter to early 90s death metal, except they're original songs, but you can tell from the words to the art to the music to the sound and production that it's in doing the same thing that we did with Devout, except with new songs. It's showing that love for the early 90s death metal scene. I hope people will give these things a chance, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about them.
Chad, once again, I want to thank you. I want to say hi to Jason, to all the guys from the band, and like you say, yes, great job Jason is doing with the Voracious Scourge. Looking forward to listen to the full-length album.
Next year, I promise you.
Chad, thank you once again, and all the best. And like always say, metal on. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Hi, this is Chad of the American band Excommunicated, and I would like to congratulate Metal Messiah Radio International with its 10th year anniversary.